right, welcome everybody back to another episode of the Big Doug and Carmi Show, your one-stop shop for all things Commanders. Today, our guest is Eric Edholm from NFL Network. Eric, thanks, man, for giving us some of your time.
Gentlemen, what's going on? A beautiful season you guys got to enjoy and a little time off. I mean, usually you guys have probably been in draft mode for a couple of months at this point, so it's got to be a good feeling.
You're not lying.
Yes, it is. You're right. We've been mock drafting for months now, and there obviously was no need for that. Eric, before we get into like some of the draft stuff, we've got a bunch of follower questions that were sent in. We're excited about those. I'm curious your thoughts with the news from the 33rd team the last couple of days, not just specifically them, but I'm curious what people, you're tied in enough to the industry. I wonder what's to become of the way content is made and distributed, even just in the next 5 years.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough topic to think about, but anybody who's in the media and anybody who consumes, written content, obviously video, radio, and podcasts and whatnot, they're going to be thinking about the future. And we've seen layoffs from, major news outlets, whether they're, daily newspapers. Obviously, magazines have kind of gone the way of the dodo bird a little bit too. And, I grew up in an era when SI and Sporting News were must reads. And I got lucky enough to work at Sporting News for a few years as well. And, that was a big thing for me. And when I was 23, I had subscribed for 10 years and to think that places like that are swimming upstream just as much as the rest of us are. It's a scary thing, and it's obviously a sobering thing too. But it forces us to be more resourceful, more creative. Think about new ways to package stuff. Obviously, video seems to be a lot more popular and palatable to a lot of younger generation people, and that's fine. I'm comfortable being on camera and talking, in any way. People will let me about this stuff because I'm passionate about it. I know you guys are too. And, hopefully that shows through in all of our work. But, there's some financial realities out there just in the industry that are hard to deny. And it's going to look a lot different even 5 years from now than it does today. And it's changed incredibly in the 20 plus years I've been doing this.
Talking about 5 years from now and what may be, it's draft week. It feels like more and more guys are choosing to do a lot of the stuff at their pro days. I know the combine is just as much of networking as it is the numbers and the stats. Do you think there will look at changing the way the combine is done now?
It's possible. I mean, obviously, we've still got to figure out what the long-term home of the combine is. Whether Indianapolis has been hosting it since I believe 1986, and the city's been a great host. It's become a week where people understand the cadence. They know how they know the layout of the land. They move through the hallways in familiar ways, and so it's obviously for NFL folks and for media folks, and to a lesser degree for fans who could be part of the combine week to a certain degree. It just has a sort of a rhythm to it that's very similar. We got to figure that out, but it sounds like it's at least staying in Indy for another year. Then beyond that is the timing of it. They've moved it up. So it's now, basically 2.5 weeks after the Super Bowl or 2+ weeks, I guess, as opposed to 3, which, for me, I always like that little extended break there to kind of recharge the batteries and everything. And it shortens down my prep time, but nobody cares about me. So that's fine. That's not going to change, but it could if the league feels like the timing is what's hurting people. We now have a college football playoffs that extends well into January. That's hurting East-West Shrine Bowl. It's hurting Senior Bowl opt-outs. There were still plenty of guys who played in the championship game who went. Some Notre Dame guys, but it's I think putting a cramp on the schedules that are already pretty packed as it is. I mean, the draft's not that far away, and it's condensing the prep time because, as you guys know, I mean, all these guys have speed trainers now, whether they work at their own colleges or whether they go off to a training facility. We've heard all the big ones out there, and they serve a purpose. There's no doubt about it, right? You improve your starts, you improve your kick, you improve your finish for your 40s. all the other testing drill stuff that these guys may have only done a handful of times before. So, that's great. But now what they're saying is I haven't had time to really utilize that resource enough.
Right.
Well, I'm going to skip combine and wait till my pro day in March or early April. So, if we see a greater trend in that direction, as we're already kind of starting to see with this year's combine, dovetailing off last year, it wouldn't be shocking to see some kind of schedule change or something to help alleviate the lack of prep time. But I don't know. It's a great question. I mean, the medical is still the most important. If you ask NFL people, what they get out of it. GMs are probably meeting these prospects for the first time, but again, it's more of a speed dating, 18-minute sessions. They're quick, the formal ones, but it still matters. And the on-field testing is also part of it too. So, from their perspective, as long as the players agree to a workout or agree to a medical evaluation, which Marvin Harrison didn't and still went forth, for the elite guys, they can kind of say, no thanks. And they're still going to go where they probably went before that.
Let's see. The free agency will happen before the draft. I'm curious, before we get to some of this other stuff, this QB musical chairs, if you will. I'm curious where you think these guys might end up. Matthew Stafford, do you think the Rams are using this as an opportunity to figure out what the real market is? He's been making about 40 a year, which is surprisingly light for a guy of his stature. It feels like the Rams can't really be thinking about starting over, can they?
Yeah, I mean, this has become one of the more fascinating stories that has developed over the last couple of weeks that has a potentially serious impact or a say on how this, like you said, the game of musical chairs will work out. Excuse me, but it's possible that nothing happens, right? That eventually the Rams and Stafford agree to another 1-year deal, kind of do what Brady and the Patriots did, where they sort of essentially signed 1-year deals for a while until the end, until after the 2019 season when he moved on. But that's kind of what this feels like to a certain degree. I know the Giants have been mentioned as a possible trade partner. I know they're not going to give up the number 3 pick in the draft, even if the Rams, say that a first rounder might be, the floor of what they'll accept. It's a negotiating process, just like Stafford's contract is, right? You ask for far better than what you expect, and then meet somewhere in the middle. So, do the Giants? Let's say they're interested. Let's say they feel like he can give them 2 years and that they can meet his salary demands. What is that worth in return? Good question. Is it a 2nd round pick? Is it more than that? Obviously the fact that his brother-in-law is on staff there, Chad Hall, an assistant coach now with the Giants, may make it a little more palatable for him. I don't know. But we kind of thought that Sam Darnold might be the first quarterback sort of a domino to fall, and now maybe Stafford is, or we have to wait to see whether the Rams are sticking with him or whether they're truly letting him kind of gauge his value, as the reports have suggested. So we'll see. I mean, you remember how late it went in August or July, I guess, when training camp. Stafford wasn't even there at the start of the start of training camp. McVay had to push back his opening press conference that day by several hours as he kind of oversaw the signing of a new deal to kick the can down the road for another year. So, I mean, the question is, how quickly are they going to be able to figure this out prior to the start of free agency, and whether there's an impasse after that.
If Stafford's gone, who replaces him?
Yeah, that's the question. I mean, you could bring back Garoppolo for a year and have him compete with, let's say, Stetson Bennett and a rookie, and feel probably okay about what you have. I mean, obviously with Puka there, you have a star receiver. Kyron Williams has really become a very valuable running back as well. They have a makings of a good defense, a young defensive line that can pressure and get after you. But let's face it, this is a step backward, I believe. So it's hard to imagine, like you said, that this would be their preferred outcome. That Stafford says, no, I won't play for $27 million. Please move me. The Giants are willing to pay me whatever, or this other team is willing to pay me far more than you are. I'd like to move on. Unless they're just really disciplined with their financial guidelines, if you will, over what players should make and things like that. It might be tough to convince Sean McVay that the team that had the Eagles on the ropes in the playoffs with this quarterback now has to, I wouldn't say start over, but take a step back. Cooper Kupp is obviously going to be moved or believed to be moved this offseason too. So, it's in one way or another, it's a little bit of the changing of the guard, but you'd hate to move on from two pillars like that, two guys who helped win you a championship not that long ago.
Eric, another major domino this offseason is Myles Garrett. People are talking about him potentially moving. It's a weird dichotomy in Cleveland, right? There's a regime in the front office that needs to win now, that wasn't too far removed from a playoff contention. So they kind of want to win and keep Myles Garrett, but at the same time, they're up there in the draft. They need to rebuild. They need to start looking ahead as well. What is your sense of how the Myles Garrett situation is going to play out? Do you think he's going to potentially?
Yeah, you're right. They sent out a preemptive message before Garrett even came out with his trade demand or request or however you want to call it. I mean, the Senior Bowl, Andrew Berry said, no, we expect him to go, want him to be a Brown for life, usher him into the Hall of Fame in 10 years or whatever it is, 12 years. And have him ride off into the sunset. But Garrett doesn't necessarily see it that way, at least not right now. The Browns haven't budged. Their message hasn't changed. They say they intend to keep him. But that message could change, too. I think they're kind of hung up with this Deshaun Watson thing right now. There's a dispute over his contract to a certain degree, but they're going to still end up having to pay a big portion of it and bite the bullet on that one. And it's really kind of hamstrung them so badly that it makes me think two things. One, at least as of right now, a draft quarterback for them is more likely than not at 2. I mean, they may love Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, but the reality is that when you're as underwater with the salary cap as they are, $30-40 million in the red, a rookie quarterback is probably the best way to attack that financially speaking, right? And number 2, Garrett obviously takes up a big chunk of that too, 20 million plus. And, you'd have to figure out whether there's a scenario where you can keep him while not gutting major chunks of the roster. There could be some retirements. There could be some other things that they can restructure and help to a certain degree. But I think it's going to be awfully hard to convince Myles Garrett to be happy being there during a rebuild with a rookie quarterback. So I think if I'm lining it up correctly in my mind, I think eventually the Browns are going to have to come to the realization that, we may want to keep him and that may be our stated desire, but the reality suggests that it would be awfully hard to prevent him from being upset and possibly not reporting for the start of camp, even though he is under contract, obviously subject to fines and whatnot. But, I think he's going to do everything in his power to force the trade, at least based on the wording of his statement, which was seemingly pretty definitive.
Do you have a potential – have you heard anything? Do you have any, intuition of where you could potentially go? Like I've heard Buffalo Bills, Detroit Lions, Philadelphia Eagles, even the Commanders. Do you have one sense of one way or the other, or any predictions that you have in your own regard?
I like how you just slipped it in there. Well, maybe the Commanders,
Exactly.
What do you think?
Under the radar, yeah.
Those are the 3 teams that I think, like, if you just, look at how the season played out, what their needs would be and how, you could envision that each of those defenses taking a major step forward. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to think that all 3 will at least kick the tires and try to figure out. They're deep in meetings prior to the combine, discussing free agency, which also includes all the potential trade pieces as well. So I would imagine that those names or that name came up in all 3 of those teams to the degree of how far are we willing to go with this. He probably wants a contract extension. Probably is expecting to make more on the line of the top edge players in the NFL right now. His deal is essentially outdated because of all the new money at that position the last couple of years. And then, will it work with our football team? Obviously, Myles Garrett would there are 31 other teams out there that would love to have the guy, right? This isn't, I'm not breaking any news here, but it may only be feasible in terms of what the price is financially, and then also what it takes to get them in a trade. And if you're the Browns and three teams come in,
what does it take, Eric?
Yeah, it's got to be more than a first round pick, I would imagine. And obviously it's, you have to kind of look back. I have to think about some of the big name sort of non-quarterbacks, and you'd almost put them up there on a quarterback level value wise. I mean, not quite lower end starter, at least for the QB position in terms of what you'd expect back. But I would imagine it's got to be a first and something. And the problem with all three of those teams that they're picking at the back end of round one. Mm-hmm. In a perfect world, if the Browns do decide they want to make a trade, it's nice to do this before the draft where you can know exactly where you're going to select versus a pick for next year, which you don't get to recoup on. You don't know where it's going to fall in the draft and all that. So if there's a team picking higher in round one that, is nominally in contention and also has the means to get a deal done, then you add a fourth team to it. Again, I just think at some point it's going to be so hard for Cleveland to say no if these offers, like we put our house in the market, we had dueling people like, yeah, this is great. 2 people bidding on the house. If you have 4 teams bidding on a superstar, that's a dream scenario for the Browns.
For the Commanders, I'm curious, would Cleveland entertain the idea of taking like a second and a fourth this year and a first next year, betting on the notion that it would be hard for the Commanders to be picking 29 again, right? So I'm curious where a GM kind of floats that line to where you say, well, I'll take the first next year because I have a feeling it'll be a better draft pick than it is this year.
I think when you saw like the Bryce Young trade a couple years ago when the Bears sent the pick to Carolina, I know it's a little bit of a different, taking a different path here, but they had multiple suitors too, and they were able to handpick where they traded it. Now, I don't think they thought Carolina was going to submarine the way they did, but I think part of the appeal of adding an additional first round pick of that trade was thinking, next year's pick could be pretty choice as well. And it ended up being that, that's how they got Caleb Williams, whether he's the guy or not. I mean, it's still, the point holds true that, it's a little bit of a lottery ticket. So I guess it depends on the team and it depends on where you're sending him. But if the idea is that he wants to play for a contender, you imagine the teams that are trading for him are going to be going gung-ho towards winning a Super Bowl, right? I mean, you acquire Myles Garrett, you're not soft-footing your way into the offseason. You're making a stamp, you're sending a message. So not that you're guaranteed to win, but those are teams that are probably a little more equipped to win. So I would imagine it would be a tougher sell. The other weird thing that somebody brought up, I was talking to an agent the other day, he said, we don't have any traded picks yet in round one. We don't really have many traded picks in the top 50. There's only a couple in round 2 that have been moved already. So there aren't many teams that have an abundance of draft assets compared to other teams. There are some that have more. The Vikings are really shorthanded in picks. A couple other teams are that way, but there aren't many that are head and shoulders above the rest of the league in terms of what they have. The multiple first rounders, the multiple second round. One of those kind of draft hauls that we tend to see every couple of years. So that doesn't really exist at the moment, which makes it, I think, more of an open playing field.
Eric, do you have a sense of how the league views Daron Payne and John Allen? Are they tradable assets, and are they perceived as high-quality defensive tackles at this point in their careers?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it like that. I mean, obviously, it would be nice to be able to pair up as many, quality D-line talents as you can, right? Look at Philly as kind of a model for what you can do with a nasty group like that. But anytime a D tackle makes a lot of money and isn't hyper productive, it's hard not to wonder, there are other teams that value these guys a little more based on their scheme or based on their history or their coordinator or whoever, and as I mean, that's a position where if you get older in age, obviously that effectiveness could drop off a little bit. We saw, Aaron Donald kind of decide he was done at a relatively young age compared to some other players. So, that's the question: is do their salaries prevent them from, attracting bidders or something like that? But obviously, if you include them in a big deal like this, I suppose it's possible. I don't know that that's what Cleveland's wanting necessarily, though. So if it involved in another trade, perhaps, but in a Garrett deal, or something like that, let's say a Max Crosby or somebody else comes available, it's possible. But with Cleveland specifically, I'm not sure if that's exactly position wise. I don't know that they value D tackle enough to make that kind of a move, if that makes sense.
It makes sense.
Before we jump into the questions here, George, Eric, I'm curious, the fan base for the Commanders tells me all the time about how we should be going left tackle in round one. We've got to upgrade left tackle. We've got to protect the quarterback. I'm just curious, as you look back a year ago, what your thoughts on were Brandon Coleman and whether it's time to move on and kick him into guard. I mean, we see that all the time. Is he one of those guys?
Yeah, Coleman was definitely a player who I think people had that guard tackle debate with, and it's such an interesting one. I mean, obviously, shorter arms or lack of height or just a certain build can even if you played there in college, can lend towards a move inside. Teams like the Green Bay Packers, for instance, and there are others, but I just know them off the top of my head. Like they almost always draft a guy who's played tackle,
yes,
but then they're willing to sort of say, hey, what do where's your best position inside? Or it could be a center too. If you're a strict center, that doesn't have necessarily preclude them from taking one. But guards and tackles, they always say, did you play tackle in college? That means a lot more to us. So yeah, I don't know the answer to that question. I think obviously you can look at a situation like Kansas City, which, last year we were talking about them needing receiver help. And now this year we're kind of talking about them needing left tackle help. And they drafted a kid in round 2 from BYU, also had Wanye Morris there. They had to bring in DJ Humphreys. And so, there are plenty of other teams who've had problems with projecting guys to that left tackle position. And so I know that's kind of a roundabout way of saying I don't know, but yeah, I would say that I probably had him as a borderline, more likely a guard, but could play tackle. And that's a good question to find out what the plans are long term for him.
As a guy like Josh Connolly Jr. from Oregon, is that an upgrade at the left tackle position, which would allow you to move Brandon Coleman in, or no? It's too early to bail ship.
Yeah, that's a good. I don't know if Yeah, I think the range for him starts late first round. Could he go earlier? Sure. But I think it starts somewhere in the 20s and goes into the early second round. There's no reason to think that he couldn't be one of the candidates who could possibly do that. The interesting one to me is probably Josh Simmons from Ohio State. And I think had he been healthy the entire year, it's possible that we could be talking about him as a top 10 or 15 pick. I'm not quite as blown away as some people are, but again, I know that there's some people in the league who have a high opinion of him. And I would say Connerly, Simmons, in fact, the guy who replaced Simmons too, Donovan Jackson, had been a guard, moved out to left tackle. I probably thought of him as a late day 2 guy as a guard. I thought he was a good player, but as soon as he moved out to tackle, it was almost like you saw a different version of him. And I thought he played some of his best football. Maybe it was just a little easier to see, or, maybe sort of tailored to his skill set a little more. But he's a player that I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up going late 1 or early 2 as well. After that, there's a little bit more of the project types. Cameron Williams from Texas, I think, is more like a second round pick, or the Minnesota kid Ursery, I would say, is probably more of a right tackle and more of a second rounder as well. But Kelvin Banks, a lot of people are having the same discussion. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? I think that's going to apply to a lot of the top 50 offensive linemen, meaning the offensive linemen who are drafted in the top 50. So, yeah, I think Connerly, again, probably not a player that I've been blown away with, but outside of that one bad rep that he had at the Senior Bowl that everybody saw on social media, I was about 4 feet away, so I got a pretty good look at it too. He had a decent week. He kind of grew on me a little bit. I like the fact that the next rep, after he got steamrolled,
he fought back,
held up pretty well. And that to me, that says something. I don't know. They're like cornerbacks and left tackles who can give up a big play, one play, and then kick it back in the next. Says they got some mental toughness to him. So Connerly's on my list of guys. I need to watch a little bit more of him. I've seen plenty, but I just sort of feel like I may have undersold him a little bit the first time around.
George, why don't we rapid fire through some of those questions you've got here so we can get in as many as we can?
Let's do it. All right. So, Eric, first question, not very interested by it, from @Commanders Post. He said, with the perceived weaker draft class, how active do you think teams will be in trading within the first 2 days?
It's a good question. I think there's a little more excitement of the possibility of next year's quarterback class, whether it's Arch Manning or Lenore Sellers, or there's other guys obviously still in college who could maybe have a little more juice than what we see in this quarterback class. I've been getting the idea that maybe some teams are going to be seeking extra picks for next year. Mm-hmm. So does that help spur things a little bit? I don't know. Maybe. Usually there was a draft several years back. I have to remember. I think it was the Todd Gurley draft. We went the first 15 or 16 picks without a trade. And it was like jarring because we had seen before that, the years leading up to it, all these moves, and some of them happened before the draft. Some of them happened on the clock. It adds to the excitement. I would almost guess that there's more likely less movement, at least at the top of the draft. And you'll start really seeing kind of like that Gurley year. I think it was that year. It was one of the years it was held in Chicago, but after about the top 10, 12, 15 or so picks, the movement might start happening a little bit. That's where the value starts kind of meeting the curve a little bit. So the top 10 this year, you have Abdul Carter, you have Travis Hunter, like a kind of a once in a generation prospect. You have Cam Ward, who's a really interesting player. Mm-hmm. But and Ashton Genty and a couple of really good tight ends, but I don't know that anybody's like going crazy. There's not that superstar wide receiver. I mean, Ted McMillan's great, but again, there's just a dearth of those type of playmakers. There's great defensive linemen in this class, but I don't know that it's getting people so juiced to the point where they have to move up and get that guy. So I'm going to say it's actually going to lead to fewer trades at the very top, and then we'll kind of see after that.
It's amazing. I think Gurley's still under 30. I mean, it's crazy. That was
having another knee surgery next week, probably. I joke because I've had 4 myself, so I'm in the same boat. So.
Got another question for you. So a lot of questions about running backs. I think we want to upgrade here in DC. Elijah Klein, the Burgundy Zone Money Mike had 2 questions for you. Do you think Travion Henderson will be around Washington? Do you think he'll be available by pick number 29? If not, what are your thoughts on like Amari Hampton and I guess is it Devin Neal, I believe, but the running back from Kansas is the other one as well.
Devin Neal, yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think the guaranteed first round this year is going to be Ashton Genty. I don't know where he's going to go, but I would imagine the clock for him starts at the Raiders at 6, and I would say probably goes down to Pittsburgh at 21, somewhere in that range, just if I had to guess. I think I have those numbers right. But you could see a second first-round pick. I think the names that I've heard the most about have been Amari Hampton from North Carolina, as you said, and also Caleb Johnson from Iowa. There are some people who really like him and feel like he could end up being, kind of the, a lot of people in Chicago are talking about with Ben Johnson here. He can be the David Montgomery of this offense and the Bears and something like that. So I suspect Johnson and Hampton are probably in that 25 to 45 range overall. And then Henderson would probably be just a little behind them if I had to guess. Who knows? Big combine could change everything. Big pro day, depending on what he does and where. I think the question is, do teams view him as something close to an every down back? He's a little undersized, although I don't really have a problem with it. I think Hampton's got a little bit better of an NFL build personally. Caleb Johnson too. They're both really well-built guys. And it doesn't prevent a team from liking him early in the second. But I would be, I think, a little bit surprised if Henderson was a first-round pick at this point. So I'll say the clock on him maybe starts at 35 and goes somewhere in the middle of round 2 or at the end of round 2. And you never know with running backs, even though the run game has cycled back into the league and we've seen rushing numbers up. the value of running backs, I believe, is on the incline, not the decline. Slight, not a lot, but last year's free agent class obviously helped, kind of usher in a little bit of the feel good vibes for the position lovers of the backs. But yeah, I would say second round feels more likely. And Quinshon Judkins too. I mean, used to be Ole Miss, now Ohio State. I've heard some second round buzz for him as well. So it's a great year to need a running back, great year to need a tight end, great year to need defensive linemen, pass rushers, interior guys. So, I think even, running back needy teams can possibly wait till round 3 in some cases. But if you see your guy, you go after him.
I'm hearing it real quick, George. We're talking running backs. I've heard more and more buzz about the kid from Tennessee. Can you tell me anything about him?
Dylan Sampson? Yeah. No, he's a
right.
He's a fantastic athlete and player. I mean, he just, I feel like there are times when he's a little bit, he presses the hole a little too hard and runs into his blockers, and sometimes gets in a little trouble. Like, so you question the vision maybe, or if it's just his instinct to go full bore every single rep. But man, he is a problem. You saw what he did to SEC defenses this year. I mean, he was averaging 150 yards rushing a game, it felt like. So a couple games where he was slowed down, but boy, I mean, it wasn't really often at all. And he's more of a slasher change-up runner type, I would say. But yeah, if he tests well this weekend, I don't know what he's planning to do, but day 2 feels pretty likely for him.
Speaking of Tennessee players, somebody must have saw your mock draft, Eric. This is a great question this is a great account, by the way. At Ron Rivera's burner is the handle that he has on Twitter. The question is, hey, there's been a lot of smoke about James Pierce, his work ethic. Have you heard anything about that? Because I'm not familiar. I've heard really great things about him, but I'm curious about what you're hearing.
Yeah, I want to be a little careful with the character stuff because you can hear different things from different people. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of does he have that fire? Does he have that burning desire? And that's going to be a question for, probably 80% of the players here, right? I mean, anytime you don't see maximum effort from you could reasonably raise that question, or if any, strength coach or position coach says they could have done more here, that's going to lead to questions. I just feel like he has so many high level reps to where you say, man, that's a pretty freaky talent right there. Like I see the effort on a lot of plays. Like he made some plays from the backside last year where you're like, okay, that's the kind of play you want to see. It's a little inconsistent, and I don't know specifically all the character questions that may or may not come up, but I think it's fair to say that the interview process will be important for him. And I think back to what I was like when I was 21 years old.
Yeah,
and
right.
I don't think anyone would have drafted me if I ran a 4.3 at 300 pounds. So, some of it is just about knowing what you're getting and where is the how good is the football intelligence? How good is the emotional intelligence? How mature are they? Are they going to need someone to, like for instance, the Philadelphia Eagles, they've taken advantage of some character guys and turn them into studs because they have a locker room that they trust. And one of the things that I admired so much about what Adam Peters did last year was he signed a slew of like hungry, determined veterans on, affordable deals to create a culture there. And you load up with draft picks this year, you add a new crop this year too. Maybe you feel like you've got enough mentors and enough veteran guidance guys in the locker room. I'm just using this as an example, but
yeah, of course.
Just saying, like, if you can build that culture in a quick amount of time and you feel confident in your leaders, I would say the character guys are the ones you want to take the best chance on. If you feel like they have, they're just not bad people, then hey, we've all been immature at some point or another in our lives. So, it's more about just sort of saying, what are we dealing with here? And I think for Pierce, it's going to be just sort of easing concerns about those things.
Yeah, because for a team like Washington that's desperate for some juice on the edge, the one thing the man provides is some juice off the edge.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, you cut out a little bit. What the one thing? What was the last thing?
I was saying for a team like Washington that is desperate for juice on the edge, that guy's got juice off the edge in spades.
Yep, no doubt, absolutely. Speed to power. I mean, he's got some length to him. He's a well built guy. The juice is there.
Two more for me, George, before we get out of here. I'm curious, two names that I'm hearing more and more of in the back end of the first round is the kid from South Carolina, Emanwari. Is that right? I'm sure.
Emanwari, yeah, Nick Emanwari, yeah.
And Jihad Carter from Alabama also starting to get some mention. Just quickly, I'm curious what your thoughts are on those two guys, because I think they could be options for Washington if they're there at 29.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard some people sort of, I mean, like if you look at Jeremy Chin, I mean, that's sort of the physical template for Emanwari. I mean, I was at the South Carolina Missouri game, and it was just one play. You know, you never scout guys on one play, but it made me kind of dog ear him, you know, like fold the paper. I'm like, I'm coming back and watching this guy. He induced a Missouri player into a personal foul. And it was just such a smart, heady play. It was a real emotional game. You could just sort of see he was raising the temperature. I mean, that was the guy who was sort of the tone setter on their defense. I felt like their D line was great, but he was the enforcer, if you will. And the way he moves at 227 pounds, and I think his football intelligence is going to be, very highly rated. I don't know that he's Derwin James, but he's that kind of a sort of player. If you think about it in terms of what Derwin does and how he played last year, that's kind of the role that I envision him in. So yeah, I wouldn't be shocked by, anywhere from the Colts at 14 all the way down to the end of the first round, somewhere in that, 14 to 28 range or 29, whatever. The only question that I heard raised about him, there was a little bit of an awkward exit from the bowl game against Illinois. Yes, like he tapped out at halftime, and I don't know that it was communicated well. I don't think Shane Beamer was thrilled about it at the time. The next day, he didn't seem all that wild about the situation. It may have just been a misunderstanding, but again, that's another example of the kind of questions that come up in the process. And then who was the other guy you mentioned?
Jihad Campbell.
Jihad Campbell from Alabama. Fantastic athlete.
Is he going to play off-ball linebacker? Is he going to end up more as a pass rusher?
I think there's a lot of questions about whether he's going to be, and same with Jalen Walker, I would say at Georgia, kind of at 245 pounds, is he going to be rushing the passer more often than not? You have to ask kind of what does he do well? Well, he pursues. He's got great range, sideline to sideline. I wouldn't say that he's fully refined as an off-ball linebacker yet. So I suspect that both, Walker and Campbell are probably going to enter the NFL with a little bit of a limited role. And I mean that, like, eventually you build up to a full-time role, but I wouldn't be shocked, especially if they play him at linebacker, if his responsibilities are kind of limited a little bit, because he made big plays at Alabama. There's no question. I think he's a fantastic, take on specimen, if you will. Like, I think physically he'll be fine, but at the same time, you still see times when there's some instincts and, can he truly stack and set the edge and all those things that you expect a down rusher to do. I don't know. We'll see. So, his length is just okay, but man, he's a fantastic player though. I mean, just, he's a fascinating specimen. I think both those guys, you're going to have some great debates on how they fit into the schemes and how much you can expect out of them right away.
So my last question was about free agent fits and not specifically wide receiver. Washington needs a clear number 2. There's talk maybe Christian Kirk or potentially Cooper Kupp or Deebo Samuel. I'm kind of curious your thoughts on whether it's a fair match of one of those options in DC. And if not, do you have maybe a day 2 or day 3 pick a wide receiver that would fit Cliff Kingsbury's offense?
Yeah, that's a good question. That, especially if we assume that T. Higgins is going to re-sign in Cincinnati, if not right away, eventually, Godwin's coming off another injury. He's had a history of ACLs. He had I think it was a dislocated ankle, if I remember correctly. It's, a tough sell for some teams just because of the injury history, even though he's a fantastic player. Amari Cooper, look at him. I mean, the Bills thought they were going to get like a true, complement to Shakir and what they had at tight end, but he just couldn't fight through injuries and couldn't really make a dent later as time went on in Buffalo. Who knows what his projection is going to be? He's over 30. He entered the league a little older than some other prospects. Stephon Diggs comes with questions. Marquise Brown had an injury last year. The guy I love, like the free agent sleeper, I think everybody's sleeping on. And I hope, the Giants just don't let him walk. But Darius Slayton's a good football
People keep talking about him. Why do you like him? What are your thoughts behind that?
I just kept thinking, boy, this guy, he's never going to be a true 1 or 2, but he's the perfect kind of glue guy to be able to, he makes big plays. He can work the perimeter. He always seems open. Like, I just feel like this is a player who's been tragically underused at times. He can fill in inside or out, just sort of a valuable piece as a third or fourth receiver who can probably give you a good 750 yards in an explosive offense. So, that's the kind of player that I get a little juiced up about, because I feel like, am I just thinking back too much from college or early in his career? But I'll die on that one. I'll say that he's still got it. So draft. Good question. Let me think of somebody who's kind of in that second, third round range. It's just not a great receiver class, but I think if you go down to a certain point, Jalen Royals from Utah State kind of excites me a little. Sort of has a little bit more of a Debo-like build. I don't know that you can use him the same way, but he's pretty well built. He's a kid who moves pretty well. Good fluidity, good route control. Had before the injury, I felt like he was working his way into a top 50 selection. I don't know that he's there yet or not. I like to see him run this week and see where his health is at and everything. But, he ran a lot of different routes at Utah State, was kind of under the radar there. Let me think of another guy who might be Jack Besh from TCU. Had a great standout week at the Senior Bowl, and he had that tragedy of his brother dying a couple weeks prior at the incident in New Orleans, the terrorism incident on New Year's Day. But what you saw was a real talented guy who kind of got lost in the shuffle at LSU, moved to TCU, found more of a feature role there, and has that kind of LA Rams receiver type. I don't know that he's Puka Nacua, but I think he's got some of those types of skills. He blocks, he's explosive, he's great yards after the catch. Just there's a lot to like about him, even with small hands and maybe a lack of speed.
Are you heading down to the combine this week?
I am. I'm driving down tomorrow. I live in Chicago, so it's only about a 3.5-4 hour drive. So I had a panic earlier, right before you guys called, or right before we started the show. My boss said, "All right, let me give you all the stuff you're doing tomorrow." I said, "I'm not showing up till like 2 p.m. I hope you're not." So there was a little panic right before the podcast here over what my schedule was. A rarity. I was in the right, and he was wrong. So I could just say that I can enjoy this moment because it doesn't happen often.
Awesome.
Well, have a safe trip, buddy. Enjoy your time, and thank you always for coming on. You know that. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Pleasure's mine, guys. Great talking to you, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
All right, thank you. See you.